I will introduce our distinguished panel of guest speakers. And we're so glad to have all of them and all of you with us here today to have this absolutely critical conversation as concerned parents, as adults, and loved ones about preventing youth suicide and ending family fire. Last week, Brady was so proud to stand with the Ad Council and our other partners to launch the new phase of our End Family Fire program, focused on empowering gun owners to give their loved ones a second chance at life, keeping their guns safely stored, and that means locked, unloaded, and with ammo away. We engaged in this space because suicides comprise over 60% of all gun deaths in America, over 60%. And so if we can find a way to meaningfully tackle this issue, we can save lives, real lives every single day who are being impacted by the epidemic of gun suicide. This information and the context for that with respect to youth is very important because today we should bear in mind suicide is the #2 leading cause of death among young people in America today, aged 15 to 19 years old. Death by suicide has a profound impact on particular communities, which is why we are so proud to be joined by the experts we have here today, who can speak to these unique experiences and ensure that we are acting in a culturally competent and informed manner, giving our young people a second chance at life. Our LGB youth, for example, seriously contemplate suicide at almost 4 times the rate of heterosexual youth and are 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide. 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. We can't even speak to the rates of death by suicide for all young people in the LGBTQIA+ community because we do not have precise enough information and reporting mechanisms to do so. These inaccuracies also hold true for reports of death by suicide in indigenous communities as well, where our numbers are not as complete as they should be due to long-standing discrimination in reporting. It's important to note that when evaluating indigenous suicide, the largest proportion of people that go on to die by suicide are young people between the ages of 15 and 34, different from national trends that find the wider population dying by suicide in an older age bracket, and that's according to CDC data. Equally alarming is a recent study from the Journal of Pediatrics that found the rate of suicide attempts for Black youths increased an alarming 73% from 1991 to 2017, while suicide attempts decreased 7.5% for white adolescents. Researchers speculate that the increase in suicide attempt injury for Black male teenagers may be a result of them opting for more lethal methods of suicide. The role that guns play in these deaths for our young people cannot be ignored. Means matter. Among minors who died by gun suicide, 82% used a firearm that belonged to a family member, and 64% of those guns were stored unlocked. We can decrease the risk of these deaths occurring. Regardless of the circumstances that our young people find themselves in, we must be actively working to ensure their safety and their well-being. We can be taking steps every single day to make sure that our young people who may be struggling with the changes to our lives, all of our lives, impacted by COVID-19, in addition to pre-existing struggles, we need to make sure they know they are valued, important, and have limited access to lethal means when experiencing ideation. We have a critical role to play in ensuring that our kids remain safe, keeping all of our guns locked, unloaded, and with ammo away. And it's now my distinct pleasure to dig into these topics with our incredible panel. First, I'd like to introduce Rob England, who is the Health Promotion Education Manager at the Potawat Health Village for the United Indian Health Services. Welcome, Rob. and Colleen Creighton, the CEO of the American Association of Suicidology. Welcome, Colleen. Casey Pick, Senior Fellow for Advocacy and Government Affairs for the Trevor Project. Tia Bell, the founder of the Trigger Project and 4 youth gun violence prevention organizations. And finally, Adam Friedman of Team Enough, Executive Council member and National Lobbying Coordinator for Team Enough. Welcome, Adam. Thank you all so much for being with us today. And I just want to start off for a question that I'll have Colleen, you dig into first. How does family fire in the form of death by gun suicide affect the constituencies with whom you work?
So with the American Association of Suicidology, one of the things that we do is we represent pretty much every demographic out there. And I'm proud to be on today's panel with Rob, who actually chairs our Indigenous Peoples Working Group and Committee. And I mean, one of the things that we work through is we represent the youth. So we have a National Center for the Prevention of Youth Suicide. So it absolutely, everything we're talking about today works there. We have clinicians, researchers who are concerned about this from what they need to tell their patients. We have researchers who are digging into this from the academic view. We also have law survivors, lived experience. So it's really kind of, this is the center of the nexus of all these different groups that we represent. So it couldn't be more timely, especially now. And I'm excited to dig in further.
Wonderful. Thank you, Colleen. Casey, how about you? How does this particularly impact the groups that you're working with?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for elevating the fact that LGBT youth are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than their straight cisgender peers, and also to elevate the fact that we simply don't know enough. We do not have data on sexual orientation or gender identity that tells us who is dying by suicide, and so we need this critical information. But what we do know makes it clear that these issues are vital to our community. We know that 1.8 million LGBTQ youth contemplate suicide each year. And we know that youth that come from highly rejecting families are 8 times as likely to contemplate suicide than those who come from accepting families. So for our community, we know that suicide is a serious problem. We know that guns are the most lethal means of dying by suicide. And we know that these are challenges that we have to face directly and ask about, and do so in an inclusive way that thinks about all of the various communities that are represented on this call and others.
I think that's such a critically important point, Casey, and thank you for bringing some of those additional statistics to bear. I think it really helps for all of us to understand the particular impacts on specific individuals and what we can do collectively to really tackle this issue. Rob, how about you with your work and the particular impacts in Indigenous communities of suicide risk?
Yes, family fire has impacted our tribal communities and the area in which I reside. The suicide rate in my county has been over double the national average consistently for over the last decade. Gun ownership is, I would say, quite common. And I know when we talk about guns, it quickly heightens one's emotions depending on where you stand. But I think, you know, to change the narrative of it being about safety of those firearms and that ammunition, and to bring education and awareness to the topic, and to let others know about how many we're losing by suicide. And for me, it's just taking responsibility of ownership of that firearm, and in no way to infringe on our hunting practices and our traditional food sources that we've had for, you know, time immemorial. So
thank you so much, Rob. Adam, how about you? You've been working especially with younger activists for some time now, helping form the Lobby Collective, and finished the satellite tour last week, sharing your own experiences with suicide in your family. What are your thoughts about, in particular, how to do outreach to youth around this issue?
Absolutely. I think that's such an important question because oftentimes we think about how to address these issues in the abstract, and it's so important to think about the individual effects that this issue can have on people my age and younger. So what I'd say is connecting in an individual capacity is essential, and creating networks for people to take action is also absolutely critical. I know in terms of the work I do, I work with a number of survivors who are 15 to 19 years old. And for those folks, having an avenue to advocate for their beliefs directly around the issue of safe storage and gun violence prevention is a really important part of the healing process. So that's the majority of my experience, but I'd say it's always important to just connect with folks and make sure they're doing okay.
Absolutely. That's so critically important. And Tia, I'd like you to round it out, certainly not last but not least, but can you give us a sense of how you think about family fire in the form of death by gun suicide and how that affects your work and your activism? Tia, I think you're on mute.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. That's my life. I'm Tia, and yes, Chris, I was saying that I was grateful for your question because I've been a witness to transformation happening as a result of awareness, and as a mom first, and then a founder of 2 gun violence prevention organizations in your nation's capital. The moment I hear "in family fire," I'm 6'4", so half of me, which is a good half, is excited and grateful that my voice of my young people are being brought to the table. But when I think of the other half of me, I just have to bring awareness to actually what responsibility and ownership looks like in the homes of people that I serve. And it's really difficult to challenge someone facing so much trauma and heaviness, just to use common words, to charge them with the self-actualization of and using capacity to take something that may be legal or may not be and, put it away. So I'm grateful to bring that perspective to the table. And I'm just so grateful for Brady and, again, your leadership, because we get to explore, that as a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Tia. And I want to dig into something that I think you have your own personal experience with, and certainly in the communities you serve. I was reading an article yesterday and have become obsessed, as all of us probably on this call are, with the experience of trauma and how that is linked to gun violence in this country. And this is a uniquely American problem when you look at this, but particularly carried out in particular communities, impacted communities. And it is particularly impactful for Black communities across this country. One of the articles that I read noted, when people talk about PTSD, of course, this term has been in parlance for a little while, but is really used to describe what is the acronym post-traumatic stress disorder. The article was saying, when you think about the impact of gun violence in particular communities where gun violence is an everyday occurrence, it's not post-traumatic stress, it's perpetual traumatic stress. And I wondered if you might comment on that and what you think about it. And there's a lot in your bio that we could spend hours digging into. Given what you have already accomplished in life, we need more time to do that. But I wonder if you might also work in what ACEs is for our audience, because I think it's important for them to understand what does that mean, adverse childhood experiences, and your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for the platform. ACE stands for adverse childhood experiences. The reason I love this research so much is because while getting my master's, being the first in my family to finish high school, go to college, and then pursue a graduate degree, I saw my life written on one page of a social work book. And I felt, again, I'm 6'4". I felt the smallest I've ever felt in my life. And again, what adverse childhood experiences represent are both personal and familial issues and challenges that are categorized by abuse and neglect. So there's a series of 10 questions that researchers have put together, 5 being personal, 5 related to family. So again, consider that us as people, not just the young people who are considering ending their lives, but us just as people, are shaped by experiences, relationships, and our environment. So what you experience personally, but also through exposure, changes you not only emotionally, but through your brain development. I got my master's in youth development in 2016, and I started my first organization for youth. I wanted to end gun violence through youth development. 4 years later, I had to start the Trigger Project, which stands for True Reasons I Grabbed the Gun Evolved from Risk. And these are risk factors that the characteristics that are linked to youth violence. So these are also associated with suicide. These have been characterized by the CDC. And I saw the world looking at us from a deficit, standpoint. And what God blessed me with was the next lesson was being able to turn the page and learn that there are protective factors that can combat these things that are supposed to ruin our lives. I mean, I've experienced 7 out of 10 adverse childhood experiences before I was 13. But I played basketball. The mailman believed in me. The drug dealers believed in me. People who own guns believed in me. And so I started to believe in myself. I had faith. I had conversation. I had dialogue. I had programs and opportunity. So what I'm just trying to do today is reciprocate that, because young people who are most impacted by taking their life are between the ages of 15 and 24. From a youth development standpoint, but only between the age of 0 and 6 months, you learn trust. Then we learn autonomy. Then we learn initiative. And this is all before we're 10, but all of those things are impeded and plagued by trauma. The same place in your brain and your mind that is supposed to enable you to be creative is the same place. The hippocampus in your brain is the same place that's stunted by toxic stress and trauma. So I started Trigger to get on the side of prevention because I discovered organizations like Brady who saw the importance of what we're doing today. So I hope that I explained that, but it's definitely important that we realize that us, regardless of skin color, economic class, we're impacted by struggle, we're impacted by exposure. And things like today are what has to be had in order to, find that hope.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tia. That was just incredible. And I think also demonstrates from your really thoughtful answer, yes, we are impacted by trauma. It has a profound impact on our lives, but we can never give up on each other. And through all kinds of different contacts that we have with each other, with the social fabric in our society, we can make a big difference around these issues. We know that. And so I wanted to turn to you, kind of building on that theme a little bit, Casey. One of the strategies that Trevor outlines and that you mentioned on our podcast, Red, Blue, and Brady, is the importance of directly asking young people if they are experiencing suicidal ideation and thoughts of self-harm. Can you explain why this question is so important when working with young people, and give us, for those of us who've not been in a situation where we necessarily have asked those questions, can you give us a sense of a way in to do that so that people who are participating have some sense of the quote right way to do it? Is there a right or wrong way to do it, or is it really you have to do it?
Absolutely. And as another basketball player, I'm happy to take the assist from Tia. So at the Trevor Project, Asking directly about suicidality. Are you considering suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? We know that that sounds a little bit blunt to some folks. It sounds jarring, especially because there's a myth out there that merely asking about suicide, especially asking young people about suicide, will put the idea in their head or actively cause suicidal thoughts. That's not true. The truth is that asking about suicide directly, it fights the stigma of suicide. It demonstrates that you are somebody who is comfortable and willing to talk about this, and that is something that will matter either in that moment if somebody is actively thinking about it, or maybe somewhere down the line if they find themselves thinking about it, they'll remember that you are somebody who can talk about this subject. And it's actually proven to help reduce suicide risk to ask directly. So it helps open a conversation. But how to do it? What does this look like? Part of that, I'm going to direct you to thetriggerproject.org/care. And CARE there is an acronym that we use. So C stands for connect, A for ask, R for respond, and E for empower. So you start by forming a connection with somebody. If you see that they are exhibiting some of the warning signs of suicidality, hopelessness, changes in behavior, things like that, and go to Trevor's website, we'll give you a full list of what those warning signs are. That's when you intentionally reach out to somebody and connect and make yourself available. Do so in a way that you have time to have the conversation and you're prepared for it. Once you've connected, that's when we really get into asking. So once that connection is established and you're ready to listen, ask the question. And that is further helpful because it really, asking a clear question gives you the chance to get a clear answer. There's really no evading that yes or no of, are you thinking about killing yourself? And once you have that clear answer, you're able to then respond. You know what you're dealing with. And particularly relevant to this conversation, once you have that clear answer, you can start talking about means safety. You can follow up with asking, do you have access to a gun? Are there medications or knives around? And once you find that, you're able to take action and really, in addition to empowering the person you're talking to with other resources, maybe connecting them with an expert if that's necessary, you're also able to take action and empower them to take the steps we're talking about here today on things like safe storage to avoid family fire.
Thank you.
All of that said, one more thing, just a reminder, while we were encouraging people to be willing to ask directly, we also remind them that you are never responsible for somebody else's feelings, emotions, or choices. And also that you're never alone in having these conversations. So many of our organizations exist to provide resources, to provide guidance, and to provide that kind of help.
That's so important, Casey. Thank you so much for that. And I think part of the point is there is no perfect ideal way to necessarily ask this question, but there are resources around. And the most important thing is that you're doing it and that there are incredible resources to help you get to a point of comfort and how you will do it, and then where the conversation will go next. So thank you so much for that, Casey. Rob, I want to turn to you now and just ask you, national trends indicate that the highest rates of death by suicide are among men between the ages of 45 to 64, and then again, those over 75. Can you explain how that statistic is imprecise for discussing the experiences of indigenous communities and how we can be better engaging these communities and this information?
Yes, and first I would like to thank you just for the opportunity to speak on this panel, because I feel as Native people, we feel that a lot is talked about us without us actually being at the table. So just the invitation itself, I have my gratitude for being here. So what that statistic tells me is that there truly is a cultural difference in our communities between the greater community and our indigenous community with our young people. And in response to that, I think there's many opportunities for us to engage in cultural prevention strategies with our young people. And what I would say is our culture is our evidence. We have a culture that has survived genocide, relocation, and boarding schools. And I know that many times evidence-based is referenced, and there's many things to learn from those. But what I would say is to not just look at those evidence-based practices, but look at cultural practices and how much we could build upon positive self-identity through knowing your traditional language, your cultural practices, you know, the traditional ceremonies, and really building that connectedness between our tribal community, and having that really just focus on our amazing resilience as Indigenous peoples and why we're here today. And one of the things that, you know, for me is to really listen to our tribal communities. And again, it's one of those things of feeling about being talked about rather than being brought to the table. And so as a Yurok person, I may be able to speak of our experiences of experiencing suicide loss on our reservation, but I wouldn't want to speak for the Southwest peoples or Indigenous communities from the plains, because I think the answers really reside within those communities. And so it is to really listen to those communities and how they could respond. And I would even go so far as to say as the response to our community on our upper part of our reservation would look much different than on the lower part of the reservation. And that's just due to what resources are available, what is going to really connect to that community. So there's so many differences, and I want to take an approach of, you know, utilizing all that we have and utilizing, you know, what resources are available to each and every one of us. You know, whether that be evidence-based practices, whether it be our tribal practices, but really listening to the community as a whole. And one of the things that we faced about 5 years ago is we did experience a suicide cluster on the upper part of our reservation. And one of the things that, you know, I do is when I share that story is to really spark an interest where others could say, well, what would work for us? You know, this wouldn't necessarily, you know, our response is not a one size fits all for our tribal communities, but I do think the template's there. You know, and it's really difficult as far as thinking about our young people and when we were losing them, because they were at the age where they were out of school, yet they weren't in the healthcare system as well. So how do you actually reach these folks? And at that point, it's hard to corral them to, you know, the cat in essence is already out of the bag, right? So we need to start early with our prevention programs. We need to be innovative. We need to think of a public health approach, get our cultural leaders more knowledgeable on suicide prevention. As Casey was saying earlier, getting people to ask directly about suicide and just knowing that suicide is a possibility, right? And to not dismiss it because it is prevalent, unfortunately, but you know, we need to do all that we can to address it. So the engagement piece is, can be really difficult. Yeah. And that's something that we've had to encounter ourselves, because when you look at our older boys and our young men who are no longer in school, who don't come into healthcare, so it doesn't matter what kind of screening, what kind of assessments we have, because they're not coming into our system. At that point, it's late.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the themes that's coming across here is how important it is not to sweep these things under the rug and to actually really talk about these issues and make sure that people are in a leadership position understand the role that they have as leaders in identifying this issue as something that needs to be tackled. And then also understanding it may not be, as you said, Rob, that it's one size fits all approach, but there are ways to address this issue that should be tailored to the kinds of communities that you're trying to serve. It's not always going to look exactly the same, but the general themes are probably fairly consistent in terms of what you need to do, especially around the communication side.
And what we found is the response, or some of the things that were provided to the community, what worked best is the volunteers from that community. It wasn't an agency or a program that is very time limited in what they provide, but really what is organic and homegrown for that community.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I was going to say that's beautiful, Rob. I think when I'm most successful in running 2 organizations with the help of my young people, youth voice is actually an evidence-based practice to increase engagement. Look it up, youth voice, youth choice. If you make them the co-pilot in decision-making, of course you provide the structure and the prompt, but decision-making, giving them a sense of belonging, a voice, you find a higher, engagement, and that is proven across so many people in grassroots, communities that are doing the work, but actually allocating funds and backing the research that people have already done, is important. And like you said, Rob and Cassie, just being innovative in our approaches. So I appreciate you saying that, because it just affirms me that we're on the right path.
That's fantastic. One of the things I want to turn to, and I'm going to ask this of you, Colleen, can you help us understand a bit better the importance of using time and controlling access to lethal means to decrease the risk for death by gun suicide?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what we heard earlier, there's kind of 2 elements that are theming through all of our process and our discussion here. Is you mentioned conversation. I think the second one is engagement. So having that conversation, but then taking action is the key. And at the American Association of Suicidology, one of our themes is suicide is everyone's business. So it's everybody's business. It's not just the one person that you think may be in danger or the immediate family member. It's everybody has a role to play in protecting everybody's safety. So one of the things out there is look at the facts. I mean, guns are or firearms are the most lethal suicide attempt method. So 9 out of 10 attempts with a gun end in a fatality. But then on the positive note, 90% of the people that attempt to take their own life and have a non-fatal suicide attempt go on to never try again, and they don't die by suicide. So linking those 2 tells us, like, we need to do everything we can to make sure that there's means restriction there, right? Give them time. So if someone's in a critical point and they have access to means and they try to take their own life, if that happens, there's a 90% chance that they will end their own life. Now, if we can interrupt that process in some way, the outcome is very, very good. So even just restricting their access at a critical time, there's a number of different ways we can do that. And Family Fire shows how critical that is. It's definitely something that we need to do.
Thanks, Colleen. And I think that's so profound. At the beginning of this, one of the things that I noted is that I hoped the discussion would touch on debunking myths that are so prevalent in our country. One of them that may be uniquely American, I don't know, I want to ask a follow-up and you can tell me, is this idea that someone intent on completing a suicide will do so, and it just doesn't matter. And in fact, that's just not true. As you noted,
Exactly.
9 out of 10 people who attempt suicide and survive go on to die of natural causes. The implication being they're not attempting suicide again. Is this something that Americans are just layered in this myth about, or is this something that you find even more pervasive than that? And how do you view the End Family Fire campaign and other similar tools really helping to pierce that myth that I think is a really important part of this?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a myth, but I think I want to call it a little bit of a lazy way out of taking action. Because if you say that and you say, well, it's not up to me, then it's out of my hands. That's for someone else to take the ball and run with it. I think by debunking the myth and by showing that no, if you take a critical step, look at all the valuable information on End Family Fire. It shows you, number one, the reason why this is important. Number two, steps that you can do to take action. You have to, you can't afford not to. Someone's life is at stake.
Yeah. Adam, can you talk a little bit about that and react to it, and also maybe go into a little bit more detail? You started in some of this before, but a little more detail in your work with Team Enough and through your own personal experiences. How can all of us here today work to better support and engage young people?
Absolutely. Well, first, Colleen, I think what you said is so potent, and I appreciate that we have someone on who has all the statistical information, because it's something we talk about often in youth spaces, right? The idea that access to a firearm fundamentally changes the likelihood that someone will die by suicide. And I think just understanding that, Chris, like you said, is the very basis for why End Family Fire is so important and why safe storage is so important. And ultimately understanding that access to a firearm in a moment of crisis can literally be the difference between life and death for someone, I think really should be what guides a lot of our work. Now, in terms of the youth space specifically, I want to go back to something that Rob and Tia mentioned, because I think this relationship between adults and young people and the frameworks we can create together is how we can take the most active approach in addressing suicide in our communities. So one thing you both touched on was this idea of creating some sort of framework as adults with the means and power to design some sort of structure, and then co-piloting an initiative with young people. I think ultimately the idea of having peer-to-peer engagement, especially for folks who are in moments of crisis or folks who are young people looking to take action on this issue, is absolutely crucial. Because ultimately when a young person works with another young person, that component of authenticity and trust is a little bit more implicit. And so from my experience, what I've been able to see is when an adult creates that kind of structure for their community, or even on the scale of Brady as a national organization, building this rough structure for young people to occupy, young people have the tools and means to be able to take action, the expertise from adults who steer this work, and the understanding of how their peers feel and the best way to engage with them. So for anyone listening who's thinking about this work at their community level, I think, again, the best thing we can do is engage young people who care about this issue deeply, like I do, like the people I work with do, and create a framework to lift up their voices, especially the voices of young people who are most impacted by this issue based on their identity and lived experience, and defer to them with the statistical knowledge that we have.
If I can also jump in for 1 second too, I think look at the field of suicidology and the field of suicide prevention. We clearly do not have all the right answers because the rates keep going up every single year. So from our experience working with the youth, they come up with the coolest ideas. They're coming up with like really great ways to get engaged. So we have to include the youth voice, because that's the only way we're going to start making an impact and a difference.
That's such an important point. Thank you so much. I just want to say to all of you listening, if you do have a question, I have millions more and I'm happy to ask all of them. But if you would like to ask one, use your chat function and I'll be sure to try and get that in the time that we now have remaining. But in the meantime, I'll continue down my path. And so Casey, I want to turn it to you and just ask, what information do you find to be most important to share with concerned adults in helping to prevent gun suicide and end family fire?
Sure. I think it's information that follows on a theme that I've been tracking through this conversation, and part of that is humility. As so many of our organizations work together on the End Family Fire campaign in those dialogues, one thing that became evident to us was that there were many people who were aware that guns and suicide are connected, that there's a major issue there, but they were so willing to say, well, yes, that's a problem, but not for me, not in my family, not in my home. And I, as somebody who works with LGBTQ youth, couldn't help but hear an echo to how much families often don't know if they have a child who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, or queer. So there's an element of be aware of how much you may not know. And one thing that we do know is that for suicide across the board, an LGBTQ youth who has one accepting adult in their life is 40% less likely to attempt suicide. So there is power in being that one accepting adult. Similarly, adults have other kinds of power. They have the power to choose whether or not to have a gun in their home. And upon having made that choice, they have the power to store it responsibly, to take the steps that we've all called out here of store your guns unarmed, locked, and with ammo separate. They should also know that they have the power to do preparation before there's a crisis. So know what the laws are in your state for how to, if it becomes necessary for means safety, to get that gun out of your house for a time in a moment of crisis. How do you do that safely and legally? That is something you can know and research for yourselves, because the laws vary by state, before there's a moment of crisis. So there are many forms of power that adults can have, and it's important that they use that power, because there's often, they don't know what they may be up against.
Thanks, Casey. That's just incredible, I think, for people to really internalize so much of what you said, all of what you said, but the idea that one person reaching out and really connecting can make that much of a difference in suicide risk is just really unbelievable. And I think important for us all to internalize and take some time to, now with all of the resources that we're citing here on the chat function, take some time, and it doesn't take a ton of time, but dig in and put yourself in a really good position to empower yourself, because chances are you are the very person who can make a big difference in someone's life that you're encountering. And that's the difference literally between life and death, as is really making sure all of these things, and that you pointed out so well, Casey, are also having conversations with people with humility and understanding that a lot of these conversations that for whatever reason in our society seem hard to have, right? Including the issue that we focus on at Brady, the presence of guns in the home. You have to ask yourself, why? Why is that a hard conversation to have? And I'm just going to make a plug about something, because I think it requires sometimes just a little bit of mindset shifting to put yourself in a situation where you can have those conversations. I'll use my own life and my own experience as a mom as an example of that. I have two daughters. My youngest daughter had severe allergies throughout most of her childhood. Luckily, most of them are gone, but she was allergic to a whole range of things. And so I had to always ask the question before she would go on a play date at a friend's house, do you have eggs? Do you have milk? Right, these kinds of allergies, right? What are you doing around this? And it was pretty intrusive, right? What kind of food do you eat? All sorts of things. I never hesitated to ask those questions, ever, 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 because my daughter's life was literally at risk. Why would we hesitate to ask the question about guns? And I will say a really important point there is, when we do it, we normalize the question. I now ask all the time, I have for years and years, and I've never had someone angry at me that I've asked the question, but I have reminded people who forgot that they had a gun in the home. And as a result of that conversation, they engaged in safe storage. That made me feel really good. And that, if we multiply it over and over and over again, and we have the conversations about how people are feeling, or have the conversations about whether they're contemplating suicide, as Casey was noting, that's how we change our society. That's how we make a difference around these issues. So I'll get off of my soapbox, but thank you so much for that, Casey. And I want to turn it to Tia and say, Tia, how did you react to that? And what are some of the things that you wish more adults knew in how to engage young people in general, because you're an expert on this, but also in particular with this issue?
Yeah, I like to say all the time, that my master's, it gave me the language, but my life taught me how. And I always like to say as well that there is a reason the word you is in youth. And you've gotten to the point you are in your life by going through your bridge to adulthood. And if you could first just remember some of those insecurities, and remember maybe not having a voice, or if that wasn't you, remember what things were done in your house to help you have a voice. And if you can just, I think Adam said it best, just come to their level. Like I talk to my daughter, again, I'm 6'4", I get on my knee. I want her to know I'm talking with her and not at her. But I think we have to just give ourselves some credit, show ourselves some empathy. I think we've really lost, good old-fashioned compassion. I wear this button of kindness because I want to spread that word and message everywhere I go. And kindness is a strength of the heart defined by character education, but it's something that's natural, because we all have a heart. So I just want to say, if you're listening, and I said this to you all earlier, I want to be some reflection of hope, because we know care is the cure to suicide. It's not medicine. It's not whatever you may think research has proven. It's care. And the last time I checked in suicide prevention, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but that 4-letter word can go so far. And the Trevor Project has done a good job to break down thoroughly how you can connect and then advocate for these young people. So just giving yourself credit. From a youth development standpoint, it's practicing youth voice, giving them a seat at the table, not just putting them on the menu, because young people are oppressed and underutilized. They have all the decisions in the world made for them, and they just have to live through them. And we get upset when they rebel, but we just have to consider the world that they're in today. That's why I try to teach social emotional learning as well, because we have to recognize and then regulate our emotions of ourselves and others before we can engage and before we can advocate. So I think you start within and give yourself credit and equip yourself. There's mental health first aid. There's suicide prevention training. There's Trevor Project. There's Colleen, really taking action and building on this conversation, because we have to really decipher the difference between conversation and real solution, real action.
Thank you so much, Tia. Adam, going on that theme, especially engagement with youth, from your experience, what could, I hate using the word adults because you are an adult yourself, but what could we learn to do better in terms of engagement that you think would make a difference, following on what Tia said?
I think, Tia, the language you used is really powerful and potent for me, because meeting someone on the level that they exist on day to day is crucial in this work. And I think it's very easy for folks who are older than their mid-20s to not have the same immediate recollection of what it was like to be a young person. And when they picture what it means to go to the level of a young person, sometimes I think young people can feel demeaned or spoken down to. And so I think in having these conversations, but also engaging young people in general, because so much trust has to be built up to do this work, it's so important to defer to that person first, right? Because we can't assume that there's one size fits all like definition of what it means to be a young person or how to meet someone on that level. And like Rob said, listening to people who are most affected, which in this case oftentimes is young people who have intersecting identities, is essential, right? And especially when folks have that lived experience, they understand how it feels to be proximate to this issue. I know a lot of young people have a lot of peers who have experienced suicidal ideation or who have died by suicide. So for young people, we're not strangers to this issue, and having real frank conversations that are led, at least in terms of the language we use, and the emotional vulnerability we express when that's decided by young people in that dialogue, I think we can have much more open conversations, much more truthful conversations, and much more impactful conversations. And one thought I also wanted to touch on that Casey was speaking about in regards to how we have these conversations is, I think, there is a level of awkwardness initially. And I can say as a young person, I don't necessarily have the same reservations around it because I've experienced a lot less life than the other folks on this call. But I've seen a lot of gun violence, and we've all been proximate to that trauma. And I know for a lot of the other young folks I work with, we've had that similar experience, right? We have an understanding of what this issue looks like. And I think we're less concerned about the social norms around it because ultimately the pain of losing someone or even experiencing like these suicidal ideations is so much greater than an awkward conversation. And that calculation, I think when folks have had less lived experience, is a little bit easier to make, right? We want to be idealistic about the world. We want to be the change that we hope to see. And I think understanding those facts before engaging in conversations with young people, especially young people you hope will work with you to make a difference on this issue, is crucial.
Thanks so much, Adam. And I know from my own experience leading Brady and working with you and the others on the executive council on Team Enough, as much as certainly I hope that you all have gained some knowledge interacting with me and others, what you're saying is absolutely true, that we gain just as much. And I think the point you're making too, Tia and Colleen and Casey and Rob have all made these points, that the creativity and the new ways of looking at things, sometimes old problems need new solutions. And we can really get it by appropriately and actively engaging and listening. And I love, again, your reference, Casey, to humility with this, because not every great idea comes from someone who's on the longer end of the age spectrum. So I think those are really important points, Adam. Colleen and Rob, I'm going to have you sort of have the last question, and then we'll wrap up unless we get any other questions, which is this. We've been talking broadly about this issue and then talking about more specific engagement with key communities. Colleen, how have you thought about both the broad engagement aspect of this and then working with specialized communities? What can we take away from that? What are some thoughts that you have? And in particular for you, Rob, what are the things you wish that people outside of Indigenous communities understood better in trying to engage and support your work?
So I think one of the big things, and Tia, you talked about this too, is the difference between talking with and talking at somebody. And I think for the longest time, we've spent a lot of time talking at and just talking from ours out. And so one of the things we've been trying to do at AAS is really reverse that. So it's a two-way dialogue, because I think there's a huge difference between what's being said and what's being heard. And so with suicide, if you look at the field right now, suicidology, we've been working on being more inclusive across the board. Because for the longest time, if you look at all the research studies, they've been typically older white men. If you look at everything we've done, it's been pretty much one segment of the population. And so what we've been doing is saying, look at all these other specialized populations, look at all these other groups, look at everyone who has not had a voice in this issue. Clearly, like I said earlier, the numbers keep going up. So we don't know the answers. We're not doing a very good job. This is going to take a full conversation, but again, not saying, here we are, we're telling you how and what to do, and it's very scripted. We're opening everything for a longer dialogue. And I think that's the key, is really number one, not talking at, but listening too. So listening to what's being said, listening to new ideas, and ensuring that everybody has a place and a voice at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think Colleen said it best, really, and then just being brought to the table and not being talked at. But I think what outside professionals can do is to, give those tools to our Native communities, when it comes to asking directly about suicide. And I could speak for myself personally. We know that a lot of people hesitate, and many times that hesitation is the responsibility if that person says yes, and they're thinking about suicide and feeling like you have to fix the problem. And for me, the game changer was, I don't need to fix this. I just need to make this person safe for right now. And so, as Colleen said earlier, if suicide's everyone's business and we could think about safety for that individual, and much of the conversation on this call was safety in regards to firearms and guns, but just in general, safety for our community. And the more that we could give those tools to our community members, and that they don't have to solve these problems, they just need to make sure that their community members are safe. That's going to be life-saving. That's going to be suicide prevention. And that is going to be the reduction in rates.
Thanks, Rob. We are almost out of time, but a really important question came up that I'm just going to throw out in a few minutes that we have left, because I don't want this to go unanswered. This question is from Michael. I think a big problem, well, it's more like a statement, but I'd like someone to tackle answering it. I think a big problem is the people who don't want to come out and disclose that they have suicidal ideations or suicidal thoughts. What are your thoughts around that in terms of engagement? I agree with him, that can be tough. If you are interacting with someone who's a friend, a neighbor, a colleague, and you think they could be at risk, but they're not saying anything to you, what should you do?
I mean, I'll take an initial stab at it, and then I hope others will jump in, because I know this is going to be incomplete. If I know that somebody is exhibiting the warning signs, I make an intentional effort to make sure that it is known that I'm a safe person to talk to. That just it's lowering the barriers to entry. Why would somebody not want to share this? There are a lot of different reasons, but one of them is fear of your response, fear that you will look at them differently, think less of them. So if I can establish that that's not me, that maybe that lowers the barrier to entry and makes me somebody safer for them to talk to. I have the advantage. I work in suicide prevention, so I can mention that what we do and, talk about how this is preventable. And so just offering up hope that way and making sure that this person, even if they're not talking to me, maybe I need to make sure they know what the resources are so they can seek out those resources for themselves.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts in our waning minute here from other panelists on that question? Thank you, Casey, for your answer for that. Well, I think most importantly, it's making sure that you're not afraid to wade in. As I hope that people have learned from this conversation, there is no right or perfect way to have these conversations. The most important thing is that you are engaging and that you're actually having the conversations. So that's more important than anything. And getting yourself comfortable. Some of the things that I talked about related to asking about allergens in a home. This isn't an imperfect analogy, but that got me comfortable asking about guns. Practice. Make sure that you're looking at the incredible resources that we've linked to here, and then practice. Practice on friends and others who may not be experiencing these things. You get better and better at these things with a little bit of practice. And understand too, something that's profound and so important here that we sometimes lose sight of in the society in which we live in today is we're all fundamentally dependent on one another. We are not islands or nations unto ourselves. We are dependent on each other. Each of us is. And all of us have good and bad days. Let's just acknowledge that and be able to reach out and talk to each other. In the end, that can make all of the difference in the world. As has this has given me a lot of energy being with all of you, incredible advocates and experts with us today. I want to say on behalf of Brady and Team Enough, but Adam can speak for Team Enough, we're so grateful to have you leading these kinds of conversations, leading the work that you do. We owe you a debt of gratitude for that. And I can't say enough about how important your work is to the future of America, ultimately. So thank you for taking your time, sharing your expertise. For all of you listening, I also want to give a special shout out to the folks behind the scenes that you never see, including in particular, Matt Heron, Elizabeth Cherish, Bettina Lanyi, and a whole host of other people whose faces you don't see, but you wouldn't see us if they weren't so good at what they do. So thank you so much, guys, for making this happen. Thank you all for participating. For more information about Brady's campaign, please go to our website, bradyunited.org, also to endfamilyfire.org, and Team Enough's website, teamenough.org. And with that, I just want to say thank you all again. It's been such a distinct pleasure, and I look forward to working with all of you in the years to come to really combat the epidemic of suicide in this country.